At my brother's wedding rehearsal, I mentioned can't wait for the baby to arrive, and my aunt dropped her champagne glass because she was the only one who knew the bride wasn't really pregnant. They had faked the test together to force the marriage. My sister-in-law Sarah had drunkenly told me she'd been faking the pregnancy for 2 months to secure the $500 Zard Dollar trust fund my brother would only receive when he married and had a child. Money my aunt managed as executor of my grandfather's will. The crystal shattered against the marble floor of Pittock Mansion's ballroom, champagne spreading across the polished surface like spilled secrets. Every head turned toward Aunt Patricia, whose face had gone chalk white. Sarah's smile froze mid-laugh, her hand instinctively moving to her flat stomach beneath the empire waist rehearsal dress she'd chosen so carefully. The October sunset streaming through the mansion's floor-to-ceiling windows cast everyone in shades of amber and shadow, but I could see the panic in my aunt's eyes clearly. The same panic I'd felt 3 nights ago when Sarah had grabbed my arm at the pre-rehearsal family dinner, whiskey-drunk and giggling, and whispered the truth she thought would make us allies. "I'm so sorry," Aunt Patricia stammered, kneeling to gather the broken glass with hands that shook noticeably. "How clumsy of me. Emma, what were you saying about the baby?" Her eyes met mine with an intensity that made my chest tight. She knew something, had known something, and watching her carefully neutral expression crack was like seeing fault lines appear in bedrock. I raised my own glass higher, my smile sharp enough to cut. "Just that we're all so excited to meet Daniel's first child. Isn't that right, Sarah? You must be about 10 weeks along now?" The number was specific, calculated, the exact timeline Sarah had slurred at me, while my phone recorded every word from where I'd positioned it on the dinner table, its camera pointed at us both. I'd learned that trick during fraud investigations at work. People forget phones can be recording devices when they're sitting face up looking innocent. Sarah's laugh came out pitched too high. "Actually closer to 8 weeks, but who's counting?" She pressed closer to my brother Daniel, who wrapped his arm around her waist with such genuine adoration, it made me want to scream. He had no idea the woman he loved saw him as nothing more than a bank account with a heartbeat. My brother Daniel had always been brilliant with code, but tragically stupid about people. At 31, he'd built a successful career as a software engineer at a Portland startup, made good money, stayed close to family, and somehow remained convinced that love conquered all. When he'd met Sarah Bennett 18 months ago at a coffee shop in the Pearl District, he'd called me that same evening, breathless with the kind of joy that made me happy and worried in equal measure. She was beautiful, ambitious, understood him, shared his dreams, all the things people say when they're falling hard and fast. But I'm a forensic accountant, trained to spot inconsistencies, to follow money trails, to see patterns others miss. And from the first family dinner Sarah attended, I'd noticed things. Her handbag was Hermes, but the stitching was slightly off. She talked about her influencer career, but her Instagram following was suspiciously round-numbered, and her engagement rate was abysmal. She ordered the most expensive items on every menu, but claimed she was between brand deals. She touched Daniel constantly, performatively, her fingers always finding his arm or shoulder when others were watching, but her eyes stayed calculating, cataloging the worth of our family home's furnishings, lingering on my mother's jewelry, brightening whenever trust funds or inheritance came up in conversation. I'd tried warning Daniel once, carefully, suggesting maybe they should take things slower. He'd looked at me with such disappointment. His little sister, who he'd protected through childhood, was now attacking his happiness out of what? Jealousy? Prejudice? I'd backed off, hating myself for it, telling myself I was wrong, that I was letting my professional skepticism bleed into personal territory where it didn't belong. Then came the pregnancy announcement 6 weeks ago. Sarah had arrived at Sunday dinner glowing, Daniel floating beside her, both of them radiating the kind of happiness that should have been infectious. They passed around a positive pregnancy test still in its plastic wrapper, and champagne appeared for everyone except Sarah, who sipped sparkling cider with one hand protectively curved over her stomach. Mom cried happy tears. Dad clapped Daniel on the back. Aunt Patricia, who'd joined us that evening, had gone very still, her lawyer face sliding into place, but she'd raised her glass with everyone else and offered congratulations that sounded sincere enough. The wedding planning had accelerated immediately. What had been a casual someday conversation became a definite date exactly 2 months away, just enough time to plan something elegant but rushed enough to happen before Sarah started showing. The $85 $100 budget my parents somehow produced seemed excessive for their normally frugal nature, but they were swept up in the joy of impending grandparenthood, eager to see their sons settled and starting a family. What Daniel didn't know, what I'd only learned by overhearing Aunt Patricia on a phone call during a family gathering 3 months back, was that our grandfather's trust fund came with strings attached. The $500 $0 would only be released to Daniel upon 2 conditions: legal marriage and the birth or adoption of a child. Grandfather had been old-fashioned, believing family stability required both commitment and offspring. It was an outdated, controlling requirement that had always bothered me, but it was ironclad, built into the trust documents by expensive lawyers, managed by Aunt Patricia in her role as executor. And Sarah knew about it. That was the part that had turned my concern into cold certainty. 3 nights ago, during the pre-rehearsal dinner at our family home, I'd watched Sarah throw back whiskey after whiskey, her careful facade cracking with each drink. She'd been nervous, jumpy, snapping at the wedding planner over seating arrangements, sending back her steak because it was overcooked when it looked perfect to everyone else. Daniel had been pulled away by our father to discuss some last-minute financial paperwork, and Sarah had stumbled over to where I stood alone by the fireplace, her breath sharp with alcohol. "You're smart, Emma," she'd said, gripping my forearm with surprising strength. "Smarter than Danny, that's for sure. You get how the world really works." Her eyes had that bright, unfocused quality of drunk people who think they're being profound. "I need to tell someone, and you're the only one who won't judge." I'd positioned my phone on the mantel, ostensibly checking notifications, actually starting a voice recording. Old habit from work. "What do you need to tell me?" Sarah had giggled, leaning close enough that I smelled the whiskey and expensive perfume. "The baby. There's no baby. I bought a fake test online. Did you know you can do that? $35 plus shipping. I've been faking morning sickness, wearing loose clothes, the whole thing. 2 months now." She'd swayed slightly. "But it's fine, it's all fine, because once we're married and I get access to that trust fund money, I can just say I miscarried. Happens all the time, right? Nobody can prove anything." My heart had hammered against my ribs, but I'd kept my voice level, knowing the recording needed clear audio. "Why would you need to fake it? You and Daniel love each other." "Love?" Sarah's laugh had been ugly. "Danny's nice enough, but I need money, Emma. Real money. You know how much debt I'm in? $43,000 in credit cards alone. I've got an eviction notice from my last apartment. I'm 29 years old and I have nothing." Her fingers had dug harder into my arm. "But your family has everything. That trust fund is my way out, and Danny's so sweet, so trusting. He believes everything I tell him. After the marriage, after the money's transferred, I'll stretch it out for a few months and then oops, tragic miscarriage. He'll be devastated, I'll be supportive, and we'll have $500,000 to start our life together. Well, I'll have it. Community property state." She'd pulled back then, studying my face, and I'd kept my expression carefully neutral, curious, the way you'd look at an interesting fraud case across your desk. "That's actually pretty clever," I'd heard myself say, hating each word. "How'd you think of it?" "Your aunt," Sarah had said, and my blood had frozen. "Patricia. I went to her office a month ago, told her the truth, asked if there was a way to get the money without actually having a kid. Thought maybe she'd help, you know? Family executor, she could fudge paperwork or something." Sarah had rolled her eyes, but she got all high and mighty about legal obligations and fiduciary duty. Said if she had proof I was defrauding the trust, she'd be obligated to report it, threatened to tell Danny everything. Her expression had turned mean. "So I told her if she said anything, I'd file a complaint with the State Bar Association claiming she'd tried to help me commit fraud. Her word against mine." She backed off after that. The sick genius of it had nearly made me admire her. Aunt Patricia, bound by professional ethics and legal requirements, couldn't act without evidence, and Sarah's word would be worthless against a respected attorney's, unless there was documentation, proof, something concrete that tied Patricia to the fraud attempt. A complaint to the Bar Association, even if ultimately unfounded, could damage a career built over 30 years. So Patricia had stayed silent, trapped by the same legal system she served, forced to watch this train wreck approach while unable to stop it. But now I knew, and I had proof. and I was going to use both to burn Sarah's little scheme to ash. The rehearsal continued around us as I excused myself, claiming I needed air. The October evening had turned cold, Portland's autumn wind carrying the smell of rain and dying leaves. I stood on Pittock Mansion's terrace overlooking the city lights, my phone already open to my work email, fingers flying across the screen. I'd spent the 3 days since Sarah's confession doing what I do best: investigating. My job as a forensic accountant meant I had access to databases most people didn't know existed, professional contacts who could find information for legitimate business purposes, and most importantly, the training to know exactly which questions to ask and where to look for answers. Sarah Michelle Bennett's financial history read like a case study in fraud, the Instagram account claiming 45,000 followers. I'd run it through authenticity software we used at work to verify influencer marketing claims. 87% fake followers. Purchased in bulk from click farms in Bangladesh and Indonesia. Her engagement rate was 0.3% when legitimate influencers averaged 3 to 5%. The brand partnerships she mentioned casually at family dinners? I'd contacted 4 of them directly under the guise of verifying marketing expense claims for a client. None had ever heard of Sarah Bennett. Her real financial situation was worse than she'd drunkenly admitted. Through careful examination of public records, court filings, and a few strategic calls to contacts in banking, I'd built a clear picture. The $43,000 in credit card debt was actually spread across 7 cards, all maxed out, 3 already sold to collections agencies. The eviction notice from her previous apartment had resulted in a judgment against her for $6,000 in unpaid rent and damages. She had a car loan 90 days delinquent, a personal loan from a predatory lender charging 28% interest, and a pattern of writing checks that bounced with enough frequency that 2 banks had closed her accounts. But the most damning evidence had come from medical records. I'd hesitated before crossing that line, knowing it pushed ethical boundaries. But Sarah was about to trap my brother in a fraudulent marriage built on lies. I'd called an old college friend who worked as a medical records administrator, explained I was investigating a potential insurance fraud case, provided Sarah's full name and date of birth. What came back was exactly what I'd needed. Sarah had undergone an endometrial ablation procedure 8 months ago at a women's health clinic in Portland. The procedure deliberately destroyed her uterine lining, making pregnancy effectively impossible without extensive fertility treatments. It was an elective procedure typically chosen by women who decided they never wanted children. The clinic notes explicitly documented that Sarah had been counseled about permanent infertility and had signed multiple consent forms acknowledging she understood the implications. She couldn't be pregnant. She'd made herself unable to be pregnant. And then she'd faked a pregnancy to access Daniel's trust fund. Inside the mansion, I could hear the wedding planner directing people through the processional order, my mother's laugh mixing with other family members' voices. Daniel would be standing next to Sarah right now, his hand probably resting on the small of her back, that dopey smile on his face, completely unaware that the woman he loved had surgically ensured she'd never give him the children he desperately wanted. My phone buzzed. A text from Aunt Patricia. "We need to talk, tonight, my office, come alone." I typed back, "1 hour, I have information you'll want to see." Her response came immediately. "I suspected you might. Be careful, Emma. What you're planning could have consequences." But I wasn't planning to be careful. I was planning to be thorough. The rehearsal dinner afterward was held at a restaurant in the West Hills. The private room filled with 40 guests who laughed and toasted and celebrated a marriage that would never happen. I sat between 2 cousins, pushing salmon around my plate, watching Sarah hold court at the head table. She'd changed into a flowing dress that artfully suggested a baby bump where none existed, her hand resting on her stomach in that universal gesture of expectant mothers. Daniel kept leaning over to kiss her temple, his eyes soft with love and anticipation. I wanted to stand up and scream the truth right there, watch her carefully constructed facade shatter in front of everyone. But that would be reckless, emotional, the kind of reaction Sarah could twist and manipulate. She'd cry, claim pregnancy hormones made me irrational, suggest I was jealous or disturbed, and Daniel would believe her because he wanted to believe her. No, this had to be surgical, precise, documented with evidence so overwhelming that there was no room for interpretation or emotional appeals. "You look like you're solving a murder," my cousin whispered, nudging my shoulder. "Wedding stress?" "Something like that," I replied, forcing a smile. Across the room, Sarah caught my eye and raised her water glass in a toast, her smile bright and victorious. She thought I was on her side, that her drunken confession had bonded us in female solidarity against the men who didn't understand how the world really worked. She had no idea what was coming. At 9:30, I excused myself, claiming early meetings tomorrow. The October air bit through my blazer as I walked to my car, the restaurant's warm light spilling onto the dark street behind me. Aunt Patricia's law office was downtown, 15 minutes away through light evening traffic. The building was mostly empty at this hour, just security guards and the occasional late-working attorney burning through billable hours. Patricia's corner office on the 12th floor overlooked the Willamette River, the water dark and moving beneath bridge lights. She was waiting when I arrived, still in the dress she'd worn to the rehearsal, but she'd added reading glasses and pulled her graying hair into a tight bun that made her look simultaneously softer and more formidable. "Show me what you have," she said without preamble, gesturing to the conference table where she'd already spread legal documents, trust agreements, marriage certificates requirements, guardianship provisions. I connected my phone to her conference room display and pulled up the audio file from 3 nights ago. Sarah's drunken voice filled the room, clear and damning. "There's no baby. I bought a fake test online. I've been faking morning sickness, wearing loose clothes, the whole thing." Patricia's face remained neutral, but her fingers clenched white around her pen. When the recording reached the part about their meeting, about Sarah's threats regarding the bar association, something dangerous flashed in her eyes. "That conversation was privileged," she said quietly. "She came to me seeking legal advice." "Which you properly refused because she was asking you to help commit fraud," I countered. "And her threat to file a false complaint against you was extortion. Neither of those things are protected." I pulled up the next file, the financial investigation results. Patricia leaned forward as I walked her through Sarah's debt, her fake social media following, the eviction and judgments. Then came the medical records, the endometrial ablation, the signed consent forms acknowledging permanent infertility. "How did you obtain medical records?" Patricia asked, her lawyer instincts immediately zeroing in on potential problems. "Through legitimate channels for fraud investigation purposes," I said carefully. "Nothing that would be inadmissible if this becomes a legal matter." "When this becomes a legal matter," Patricia corrected. "Trust fraud is a criminal offense in Oregon. If we present this evidence to Daniel and he still chooses to marry her, I'm legally obligated to report the attempted fraud to authorities." She removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "Emma, I need you to understand something. Once we start this, there's no going back. Sarah will face criminal charges. She could go to prison. Your brother will be devastated." "My brother will be devastated either way," I said. "Better devastated now than devastated in 6 months when she claims a miscarriage and disappears with $500,000 and everything else she can squeeze out of him in a divorce." Patricia nodded slowly. "I've been carrying this weight for a month, unable to act without proof, watching this train wreck approach. When you mentioned the baby at the rehearsal tonight, I thought you somehow knew about my meeting with Sarah, that you were forcing my hand." She managed a thin smile. "I should have known you'd be too smart to make an accusation without evidence." "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now we do this properly." Patricia began gathering documents, her movements precise and practiced. "Tomorrow morning, I'm calling an emergency meeting with Daniel, your parents, and Sarah. I'll present the evidence in my capacity as trust executor. Notify them that based on credible evidence of fraud, the trust cannot be released under the current circumstances, and inform Sarah that her attempt to defraud the trust will be reported to law enforcement unless she withdraws from the marriage voluntarily and signs a statement admitting the fraud." "She won't go quietly," I said. "No," Patricia agreed. "She'll threaten, she'll cry, she'll claim we're conspiring against her. But Emma, this recording, combined with the medical evidence and financial investigation, is airtight. Even if she somehow convinced Daniel to marry her anyway, I couldn't release the trust funds without committing fraud myself. And I won't do that, not even for family." I thought about Daniel, about how his face would look tomorrow when his world came crashing down, when he learned that the woman carrying his child, except she wasn't carrying his child, had made herself incapable of carrying any child, had been using him from the beginning. The pain would be catastrophic. But lies that deep don't heal with time. They metastasize. "What about her threat against you?" I asked. "The bar association complaint? Patricia's smile turned sharp. Let her try. I have detailed notes from our meeting, documentation of my refusal to assist with fraud, and her own recorded voice admitting she threatened me with false accusations to ensure my silence. If she files a complaint, she'll be adding another criminal charge, attempted obstruction of justice and extortion of a court officer. She paused. Though I suspect once she realizes how thoroughly caught she is, self-preservation will override spite. We spent another hour preparing, Patricia making notes in her precise legal handwriting, me organizing the evidence files into a presentation that would be impossible to refute or rationalize away. By the time I left her office after 11, my hands were shaking with adrenaline and anticipation. Tomorrow, Sarah's carefully constructed lies would collapse. Tomorrow, my brother's heart would break. Tomorrow, justice would be served cold and documented and absolutely merciless. I drove home through empty streets, Portland sleeping around me, and felt no guilt whatsoever about what I was about to do. The emergency family meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. at my parents' house in the West Hills. I arrived early, helping my mother set out coffee and pastries she'd bought, despite the tension radiating through her movements. Patricia had called her late last night, explaining only that there was a serious legal matter regarding the trust fund that required immediate family discussion. My father sat in his study, his normal Saturday morning golf game canceled, his face drawn with worry. Daniel showed up at 8:50, confused and concerned. What's going on? Mom said something about the trust fund? Is there a problem with the paperwork? He was dressed casually, jeans and a sweater, his hair still damp from the shower. In less than 24 hours, he was supposed to be getting married. Instead, his life was about to detonate. Patricia will explain everything, Mom said, her voice tight. She kept glancing at me with questions in her eyes, but I'd told her nothing, following Patricia's instructions to let the evidence speak first, to avoid emotional reactions clouding the facts. Sarah arrived last, 15 minutes late, breezing through the door with an annoyed expression. This better be important. I have a final dress fitting at 11 and the hairstylist consultation at 2. She'd dressed carefully, I noticed. A flowing top that suggested pregnancy curves, her hand already resting protectively on her flat stomach. The performance was so practiced it might have been convincing if I didn't know the truth. Patricia was setting up her laptop at the dining room table, legal documents arranged in neat stacks beside her. She'd worn a severe charcoal suit, her hair pulled back tightly, every inch the attorney rather than the beloved aunt. When she looked up at Sarah, her expression was glacial. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Patricia began, her voice professionally neutral. I'm here in my capacity as executor of Thomas Morrison's trust, which requires me to ensure all conditions are met legally and honestly before distributing funds. She looked directly at Daniel. The trust stipulates that the $500,000 will be released to you upon your legal marriage and the birth or adoption of a child. Is that your understanding? Daniel nodded, confused. Yes, but why are we discussing this now? Sarah's pregnant. We're getting married tomorrow. The trust will be released after the baby's born, right? That's what I need to address. Patricia opened her laptop, angling the screen so everyone could see. 3 days ago, Emma came to me with information suggesting the pregnancy might not be legitimate. As executor, I'm legally obligated to investigate any potential fraud involving trust assets. Sarah's face went pale, but she recovered quickly, her voice rising with indignation. Are you serious right now? The day before my wedding, you're accusing me of lying about being pregnant? She turned to Daniel, her eyes filling with tears. Danny, I can't believe your family is doing this. This is insane. Sarah, please let Patricia finish, my father said quietly, though his face showed his own distress at the accusation. Patricia tapped her laptop, and Sarah's voice filled the room, slurred with alcohol but perfectly clear. The baby. There's no baby. I bought a fake test online. Did you know you can do that? $35 plus shipping. Daniel's face went blank, the color draining away as he listened to the woman he loved describe her fraud in clinical detail. When the recording reached the part about the trust fund, about faking a miscarriage after securing the money, he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. That's not me, Sarah said desperately. That's doctored. It's fake. Anyone can manipulate audio now with AI. It's time-stamped and backed up to cloud storage, I said quietly. From Wednesday night, during the pre-rehearsal dinner, you were drunk. You told me everything. Sarah's eyes locked on mine, and I watched the realization hit. I hadn't been an ally. I'd been gathering evidence. You bitch, she breathed. You set me up. No, I replied. You confessed. I just recorded it. Patricia continued relentlessly, pulling up the next evidence file. This is a financial investigation Emma conducted in her professional capacity as a forensic accountant. Sarah, would you like to explain the $43,000 in credit card debt? The eviction judgments? The fake Instagram followers purchased from Click Farms? Each piece of evidence appeared on screen, documented and irrefutable. Sarah's face had gone from pale to flushed, her breathing rapid. Those are private records. You had no right. They're public records and information obtained through legitimate investigative channels. Patricia cut her off. But this is the most relevant finding. She pulled up the medical records, the clinic letterhead clearly visible. 8 months ago, you underwent an endometrial ablation procedure at Portland Women's Health. The procedure makes you functionally infertile. You signed consent forms acknowledging this. You made yourself incapable of pregnancy, and then you faked a pregnancy to access my nephew's trust fund. The room fell silent except for Sarah's harsh breathing. Daniel still stood frozen, staring at the medical records on screen as if he could make them say something different through sheer force of will. I can explain, Sarah started, but Daniel finally spoke, his voice hollow and distant. You had surgery to make sure you could never have children. It wasn't a question. 8 months ago, before you met me, he turned to look at her and the devastation on his face was almost physical. I told you on our second date that I wanted kids someday. You said you wanted them too. You said you couldn't wait to start a family with me. Danny, please. Were you ever going to tell me? His voice cracked. Or were you just going to keep lying, keep faking, take the money, and then what? Divorce me after pretending to miscarry? Sarah's tears were real now, desperate. I needed the money. You don't understand what it's like to have nothing, to be drowning in debt. So you used me. The words came out flat, dead. Everything we had, everything I thought we were building together was just a con. As executor of the trust, I'm obligated to inform you that under these circumstances, I cannot release any funds, Patricia said formally. Furthermore, attempted trust fraud is a criminal offense in Oregon. Sarah, I strongly suggest you retain legal counsel. You can't prove anything. Sarah's voice had turned shrill. That recording could be fake. Medical records can be wrong. You're all just jealous because Daniel chose me. The recording has metadata proving authenticity, I said calmly. The medical records are certified copies from the clinic with the attending physician's signature. Your financial records are pulled from public databases and credit reporting agencies. And we haven't even discussed the fake pregnancy test you purchased online. I pulled up the email receipt I'd found by accessing Sarah's Gmail through a password reset, another ethically gray area, but I'd covered my tracks carefully. Here's your confirmation email from fakebabytest.com. $35 shipped to your previous address, dated exactly 2 months ago. Sarah stared at the screen, and something in her seemed to break. Her shoulders sagged, the tears stopping abruptly, replaced by a hard, calculating expression I'd seen glimpses of before, but which now emerged fully. This was the real Sarah, stripped of performance and pretense. Fine, she said flatly. You want the truth? Yes, I faked it. Yes, I needed the money. But you know what? Danny was never going to marry me otherwise. We'd been dating for over a year, and he kept saying someday about marriage, about the future. I needed that trust fund to pay off my debts, and the only way to get it was to make him think I was pregnant. She looked at Daniel with something almost like pity. And you would have been happy, Danny. I would have been a good wife. After the fake miscarriage, we could have adopted or something, and you would have had the family you wanted. Built on lies, my mother said, her voice shaking with anger. You were going to trick our son into marriage, steal his inheritance, and then expect him to just accept it? Sarah shrugged, the gesture chilling in its casualness. People lie to get what they need all the time. I'm just honest enough to admit it. That's not honesty, Patricia said coldly. That's sociopathy. She closed her laptop with a decisive click. Sarah, the wedding is canceled. You need to leave this house immediately. I'll be filing a report with the Portland Police Fraud Division by end of business today. I suggest you use the time between now and then to contact an attorney. I'll tell everyone it was consensual. Sarah tried desperately. That Danny knew that this was all his idea to access the trust fund early. With what evidence? I asked. Every text message between you and Daniel talks about the baby as real. Every email, every voicemail. Meanwhile, we have your recorded confession, medical proof you're not pregnant and can't be pregnant, and your purchase of a fake pregnancy test. Who do you think a jury will believe? Sarah's eyes darted around the room, looking for an ally, an exit, anything. Finding none, she grabbed her purse and stood with as much dignity as she could muster. You're all going to regret this, she said, but the threat rang hollow. Danny, when you realize what you've lost, get out. Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through her words like steel. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. If I never see you again, it will be too soon. Sarah fled, her heels clicking rapidly against the hardwood floor. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. The silence that followed felt suffocating. My mother moved first, going to Daniel and wrapping her arms around him. He stood rigid for a moment, then collapsed into her embrace, his shoulders shaking with sobs that had been building since the recording started playing. I'm sorry, he choked out between gasps. I'm so sorry, I should have seen it, I should have known. This isn't your fault, Dad said firmly, moving to join the embrace. She was a professional liar. She fooled all of us. Not Emma, Daniel said, pulling back to look at me. His eyes were red, devastated, but something else moved beneath the pain, gratitude mixed with hurt. You knew. You investigated her. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I tried once, I reminded him gently. You thought I was being jealous or overprotective, and I didn't have proof until Wednesday night. Would you have believed me without evidence? He shook his head slowly. No. I would have defended her. Told you that you didn't know her like I did. A bitter laugh escaped. Turns out I didn't know her at all. Patricia began packing up her documents. Daniel, I need you to understand something. Even if Sarah had somehow convinced you to marry her anyway, I couldn't have released the trust funds without committing fraud myself. The conditions require a legitimate pregnancy or adoption. A fake pregnancy doesn't meet the terms, and as executor, my legal duty is to the trust, not to family preference. I know, Daniel said tiredly. You did the right thing. Emma did the right thing. He slumped into a chair, his hands covering his face. I really loved her. Or who I thought she was. The person you loved never existed, I said quietly. Sarah was playing a role designed to extract money from you. Nothing about what you experienced was real. The wedding, Mom said suddenly, practical concerns breaking through emotion. We need to cancel everything. The venue, the caterer, the flowers, the photographer. Oh God, we've already paid deposits. I'll handle the cancellations, Breeze, Patricia offered. As executor, I can explain that legal issues with the trust have made the marriage inadvisable. Most vendors will understand, and many have clauses for emergencies. What about everyone we invited? Dad asked. Family, friends, colleagues. There are over 200 people expecting a wedding tomorrow. We'll send an email blast today, Mom decided. Something simple. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the wedding has been postponed. We apologize for the inconvenience and appreciate your understanding. We don't owe anyone explanations beyond that. I pulled out my phone, already composing the message. Daniel sat motionless, staring at nothing, processing the complete destruction of his future, as he'd imagined it. I wanted to comfort him, but I also knew that sometimes pain has to be felt fully before healing can begin. There's something else you need to know, Patricia said hesitantly. Sarah came to my office a month ago. She told me directly that the pregnancy was fake and asked if there was a way to access the trust funds without actually having a child. Daniel's head snapped up. "And you didn't tell me?" "She threatened me," Patricia admitted. "Said if I revealed her confidence, she'd file a false complaint with the State Bar Association claiming I'd tried to help her commit fraud. As an attorney, even an unfounded complaint can destroy my career. I documented everything, but I couldn't act without proof, and her word against mine wouldn't have been enough. I'm sorry, Daniel. I should have found a way to warn you despite the risk." "So everyone knew except me," Daniel said bitterly. "My sister knew, my aunt knew, and I was just the idiot getting played." "We didn't know," I corrected. "We suspected. There's a difference. And the moment I had proof, I brought it to Patricia so we could stop this legally and properly." He nodded slowly, not quite accepting but not arguing either. The shock was still too fresh, the betrayal too deep. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls and cancellations. I contacted the venue first, explaining that legal issues had forced the postponement. The event coordinator was sympathetic, especially when I mentioned the bride had been caught in fraud. Apparently, they'd dealt with similar situations before. The caterer was less understanding until Patricia got on the phone and mentioned potential criminal proceedings, at which point they suddenly became very cooperative about refunding deposits. By early afternoon, the wedding that should have happened tomorrow had been dismantled entirely, reduced to canceled contracts and apologetic emails. Daniel retreated to his childhood bedroom upstairs, refusing food, refusing company, just needing space to process the implosion of his life. I sat at the dining room table, my laptop open, finishing the formal complaint Patricia would file with the police fraud division. The evidence was organized into a comprehensive brief: audio confession, medical records proving infertility, fake pregnancy test purchase, financial motive documented through debt records, and Sarah's explicit admission that morning about the fraud. It was airtight, prosecutable, devastating. "Do you think she'll try to run?" Mom asked quietly, sitting beside me with coffee neither of us would drink. "Maybe," I said. "But where would she go? She has no money, no resources, and a paper trail that would make her easy to find. Plus, running would be an admission of guilt that would guarantee prosecution." "What happens now? Prison?" "Possibly. Attempted trust fraud can carry up to 5 years in Oregon. Add in the extortion charge for threatening Patricia, and she could be looking at serious time." I closed the laptop. "But honestly, I think they'll offer her a plea deal. First offense, no violence. She'll probably get probation and restitution requirements." "That doesn't seem like enough," Mom said, her voice hardening. "After what she did to Daniel, after how she lied to all of us." "Legal consequences aren't about revenge," I said, though part of me agreed. "They're about justice and deterrence. Sarah will have a criminal record. She'll never be able to pull something like this again, but I wanted more than legal consequences. I wanted her to lose everything, the way she'd planned to take everything from Daniel." And as I sat there, watching the afternoon light shift across the dining room where Sarah had played her role so convincingly, I realized there was more I could do. That evening, while Daniel slept fitfully upstairs and my parents tried to process the day's revelations, I sat in my childhood bedroom with my laptop and began phase 2. Legal justice would be handled by authorities. But social justice? That was something I could deliver personally. Sarah's Instagram account had been her primary tool of deception. The fake following, the carefully curated photos suggesting a lifestyle she couldn't afford, the persona of a successful influencer that had made her seem like a catch rather than a con artist. She had 45,000 followers who believed her carefully constructed lies, brands who occasionally sent her free products in exchange for promotional posts, and a comments section full of admirers praising her style and grace. I created a document titled "The Truth About Sarah Bennett" and began writing. Not an emotional rant, but a cold, factual breakdown of everything we'd discovered. The fake pregnancy, the medical procedure that made pregnancy impossible, the debt she'd hidden, the fake social media following, the plan to defraud the trust fund. I included screenshots of evidence, the audio transcript, the medical records with identifying information redacted for privacy laws, the fake baby test purchase receipt, her debt records from public court filings. Then I included the video I'd recorded that morning on my phone. Patricia had focused on legal matters, but I'd kept recording through Sarah's breakdown, through her admission that she'd used Daniel deliberately, that the fake miscarriage was always the plan, that she viewed marriage as a business transaction rather than a commitment. The document was 15 pages long, methodically organized, impossible to dismiss as vindictive lies, because every claim was backed by evidence. I converted it to PDF, then created a new email account under a neutral name, documentedtruth2024@gmail. My first email went to the brands Sarah had tagged in her Instagram posts, the ones who'd sent her free products or featured her in their marketing. You may want to know that this influencer has been exposed for fraud, with fake followers and fake pregnancy. Attach documentation for your review. The second email went to Instagram's fraud department with the evidence of her purchased followers. Social media platforms took fake engagement seriously when properly documented, and Sarah's account violated multiple terms of service. The third email was the one I hesitated over. Sarah's ex-roommate from the apartment she'd been evicted from had left a scathing review online about unpaid rent and damages. I found her contact information through public records and sent her a copy of the fraud documentation with a simple note. Thought you'd want to know. She tried to con someone else. This is what stopped her. Word would spread. That's what the internet does best. It spreads truth and lies indiscriminately, but well-documented truth spreads faster and sticks harder. By morning, Sarah's carefully constructed online persona would begin crumbling, her follower count dropping as Instagram investigated, brands demanding she return products or issue refunds, people who'd known her previously coming forward with their own stories of her financial manipulations. I sent the PDF to local news outlets with a carefully worded tip about trust fund fraud involving a wedding canceled at the last minute. 2 responded within an hour, asking for interviews. I declined, but sent them Patricia's contact information as the trust executor who could comment on legal matters. Patricia would handle media properly without emotion, just facts. My phone rang past midnight. Tyler's name appeared on the screen, Daniel's best friend from college, who'd been scheduled as best man tomorrow. Word was getting out. "Emma, what the hell happened?" Tyler demanded. "I just got Daniel's text saying the wedding is canceled. No explanation, and I can't reach him. Is he okay?" I gave him the abbreviated version. Fake pregnancy, fraud attempt, evidence gathering, cancellation. Tyler listened in stunned silence, then swore creatively for 30 seconds straight. "I never liked her," he finally said. "Thought she was too perfect, you know? Like she was playing a character. But Danny was so happy, and I figured I was just being cynical." He paused. "Is he going to be okay?" "Eventually," I said, though I wasn't entirely certain. "Right now, he's devastated, but better devastated now than destroyed later." "Does Sarah know you're the one who exposed her?" "She knows I recorded her confession and conducted the investigation. She called me a bitch this morning." Tyler laughed bitterly. "You probably saved my best friend's life. Financial ruin, emotional manipulation, a fake baby. That's the kind of trauma that breaks people. You're a hero." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt cold and focused and grimly satisfied. Sarah had planned to destroy my brother, and instead I was destroying her, systematically and thoroughly. The next morning, Sunday, the day that should have been Daniel's wedding, I woke to find my phone flooded with messages. The Instagram investigation had moved quickly. Sarah's account was suspended pending review. 3 brands had posted statements distancing themselves from her and requesting return of promotional products. The ex-roommate had shared my document on Facebook with a rant about Sarah's pattern of fraud, and it had been shared 200 times by noon. Most satisfyingly, a local news outlet had picked up the story. Not Daniel's name. Patricia had ensured his privacy was protected, but Sarah's was published alongside her Instagram photos and the basic facts. Attempted trust fund fraud through a fake pregnancy, criminal investigation pending, multiple debts, and a history of deception. The comment section was brutal. I went downstairs to find my parents in the kitchen with Daniel, who looked like he hadn't slept despite being upstairs for nearly 14 hours. His hair stuck up at odd angles, his eyes were bloodshot, and he'd aged 5 years overnight. "There's an article about Sarah in the Portland Tribune," he said hollowly, showing me his phone. "They're calling her a con artist." "That's what she is," I replied, pouring coffee. "I sent them the documentation." He looked at me for a long moment. "You're destroying her." "Yes," I agreed without apology. "She tried to destroy you. I'm just making sure everyone knows who she really is." Is that justice or revenge? Does it matter? I sat across from him, meeting his eyes directly. She would have taken $500,000 from you, Danny. She would have faked a miscarriage, broken your heart, and probably left you emotionally damaged for years. She deserves everything that's coming to her. What is coming to her? He asked quietly. Patricia filed the criminal complaint yesterday evening. Police Fraud Division will investigate, probably issue a warrant this week. She'll be charged with attempted fraud and likely extortion for threatening Patricia. The brands she scammed want restitution. Her Instagram account is being deleted. Everyone who knew her online now knows she's a fraud. Her debt collectors will see the news and intensify collection efforts. I took a sip of coffee, letting the reality sink in. Sarah's going to lose everything. Her reputation, her freedom potentially, any chance of pulling this scam on someone else. By the time I'm done, her name will be permanently associated with fraud. Mom looked troubled. Emma, sweetheart, I understand being angry, but this feels excessive. She was going to fake a miscarriage, Mom. She was going to make Daniel grieve for a child that never existed, all while stealing his inheritance. Tell me what part of my response is excessive compared to that. No one answered, because they couldn't. Sarah had earned every consequence heading her way. The doorbell rang, and Dad went to answer it. I heard Patricia's voice, formal and clipped, and then she appeared in the kitchen carrying her briefcase and wearing the same severe expression from yesterday. The police want to speak with Daniel and Emma tomorrow morning, she announced. They're treating this as an active fraud investigation. They also want the original recording device and any other evidence gathered. She looked at me meaningfully. Emma, they'll ask about your investigative methods. Be prepared to explain how you obtained each piece of information. Everything was legal, I said confidently. Public records, professional databases I have legitimate access to through work, and the medical records were obtained through proper channels for fraud investigation. And the social media campaign? Also legal. Everything I shared was documented truth, and I have the evidence to back it up. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Patricia nodded, though concern still lingered in her expression. Just be careful. Sarah's attorney, if she has one, will try to paint you as vindictive and obsessed. They'll argue that your actions constitute harassment. Let them argue it, I replied. A jury will hear Sarah's recorded confession and see the evidence of her fraud. They'll understand that exposing a con artist isn't harassment, it's public service. The rest of Sunday passed in a strange limbo. Daniel stayed in his room mostly, occasionally coming down for food he didn't eat. My parents fielded calls from confused relatives who'd received the wedding cancellation notice and wanted details. Patricia worked from our dining room, preparing documentation for the police interview. I spent the afternoon monitoring the spread of information online, watching as more people who'd known Sarah began sharing their own stories. A former coworker from a retail job Sarah had lasted 3 months had posted about how Sarah had stolen merchandise and blamed another employee. A woman who'd been her roommate 2 years ago described how Sarah had forged her signature on utility bills and stuck her with hundreds in unpaid charges. Each story painted the same picture, a pattern of manipulation, theft, and deception that stretched back years. By evening, Josser Sarah Bennett fraud was trending locally on Twitter, and I felt a cold satisfaction watching the social destruction unfold in real time. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. You destroyed my life. Sarah's voice was raw, broken, nothing like the polished performance she'd maintained for 18 months. I've lost everything because of you. My Instagram is gone, brands are threatening to sue me, my face is all over the news as a criminal, and the police called saying they're issuing a warrant. Are you happy now? Yes, I said simply. You tried to destroy my brother. This is what happens when you fail. I needed that money, Emma. I was desperate. You don't know what it's like to have nothing. So you decided to steal it through fraud and emotional manipulation. Poor you. My voice was ice. You made yourself infertile and then faked a pregnancy to trap a man who desperately wanted children. You planned to make him grieve a baby that never existed. You deserve everything that's happening to you. I loved him, she said, and I actually laughed. You loved his trust fund. You saw a mark and you played him perfectly. The only mistake you made was underestimating his sister. There was a long pause, filled with harsh breathing. When Sarah spoke again, her voice had changed, less desperate, more calculating. If I go down, I'm taking everyone with me. Your aunt helped me plan this. Those meetings we had, I recorded them too. I'll tell the police she was coaching me on how to access the trust illegally. No, you won't, I replied calmly. Because Patricia documented every meeting, every conversation, every time she refused to help you and you threatened her. You try to implicate her and you'll add perjury and making false statements to law enforcement to your charges. Plus, I have your confession on tape admitting you threatened her with false bar association complaints. So please, make more threats. Give prosecutors more ammunition. The silence stretched longer this time. Then quietly, I'm pregnant. My blood froze. What? I'm actually pregnant now. Found out this morning. So congratulations, Emma. You destroyed the mother of Daniel's real child. I felt dizzy, the kitchen tilting around me. If she was telling the truth, but she couldn't be. The medical records showed. You're lying, I said, forcing confidence I didn't feel. The endometrial ablation made you sterile, made pregnancy extremely unlikely, not impossible, Sarah corrected, and I heard the smile in her voice. It's rare, but it can happen. I'm 6 weeks along. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow to confirm, but the home test was positive. 3 of them, actually. Real ones this time. My mind raced through implications. If she was pregnant, actually pregnant, then everything changed. The fake pregnancy was still fraud, but a real pregnancy would give her leverage, connection to Daniel that couldn't be severed, access to his life forever through a child. I don't believe you, I said flatly. This is another con. Believe what you want. When the paternity test proves it's Daniel's baby, you'll have destroyed the mother of your niece or nephew. Hope you can live with that. She hung up. I stood frozen, phone pressed to my ear long after the call disconnected. It was another lie. It had to be. The medical records were clear about the ablation's effects. But Sarah's voice had carried certainty, and she'd learned her lesson about verifiable lies. She wouldn't claim pregnancy again unless she could prove it. Unless she could prove it. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the medical records again, reading through the fine print I'd skimmed before. Endometrial ablation had a 99% effectiveness rate for preventing pregnancy, but not 100%. The clinic notes mentioned that in rare cases women could still conceive, though the pregnancies were typically high risk and often non-viable. Rare, not impossible. I called Patricia immediately. She answered on the first ring, clearly recognizing my number. Emma, what's wrong? Sarah just called. She claims she's actually pregnant now with Daniel's baby. Says she found out this morning. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. That would be unfortunate timing. It would be convenient timing, I corrected. Another manipulation. Another lie to try to salvage her situation. Perhaps. Or perhaps it's true. And we're about to make a complicated situation catastrophically worse. Patricia's voice carried a warning. Emma, if Sarah is genuinely pregnant with Daniel's child, the fraud charges still stand, but we'll have created a situation where a child grows up with a mother who's a convicted felon and a father who's been turned against her by his family. That child becomes collateral damage. She's lying, I insisted, needing it to be true. This is exactly what a con artist would do when caught. Create a new crisis to distract from the old one. Probably, Patricia agreed. But we need to verify before we proceed further. I'll contact her attorney, assuming she has one by now, and request immediate medical confirmation from a reputable physician. If she's lying, it will be documented perjury. If she's telling the truth, we'll need to reassess our approach. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen as evening darkened to night, my carefully constructed case suddenly wobbling on uncertain ground. Everything I'd done was justified if Sarah was the calculating predator I'd proven her to be. But if there was a real baby, a real child who would be Daniel's son or daughter, then my scorched earth destruction of Sarah's life became something more complicated. I went upstairs and knocked on Daniel's door. He opened it slowly, his face still showing the devastation of the past 24 hours. What? Sarah called me. She claims she's actually pregnant now, with your baby. Every emotion flickered across his face. Hope, fear, confusion, anger. How? The medical records showed she couldn't. Unlikely. Not impossible. Patricia's verifying it tomorrow. I met his eyes. Danny, if it's true, if there's really a baby, does that change anything for you? He was quiet for a long time, processing. Finally, I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. He looked at me with something that might have been accusation. You were so sure she was evil that destroying her was justice. What if you're wrong? What if she's carrying my child and we've just turned her into a criminal? The fake pregnancy was still fraud, I said firmly. Even if she's coincidentally pregnant now, that doesn't erase what she did. Doesn't it? Daniel's voice rose slightly. What if she faked the pregnancy because she was desperate, and then by some miracle actually got pregnant, and now instead of being my wife and the mother of my child, she's going to prison because you couldn't let it go? That's not what happened. You don't know what happened, he shouted, the first real anger I'd seen from him directed at me. You found evidence and you assumed the worst, and you destroyed her life in 48 hours. What if you're wrong, Emma? What if you just ruined everything for all of us? I left his room shaken, doubts creeping in for the first time. I'd been so certain, so focused on protecting my brother, that I hadn't considered alternative explanations. What if Sarah had faked the pregnancy out of genuine desperation, planning to make it real somehow? What if the timing of the ablation and her meeting Daniel was coincidence, not conspiracy? What if... No. I pulled myself back from that spiral. Sarah's own words condemned her. She'd admitted planning a fake miscarriage. She'd admitted using Daniel for money. She'd threatened Patricia with false accusations. These were not the actions of someone in a sympathetic situation making poor choices out of desperation. These were the calculated moves of a predator who'd been caught. If she was pregnant now, it was either a lie or the most coincidental timing in history. And I didn't believe in coincidences that convenient. But doubt had been planted. And as I lay awake that night, staring at my childhood ceiling, I wondered for the first time if my need for revenge had pushed me past justice into cruelty. The answer came at 6:47 a.m. when Patricia called, her voice tight. Sarah's attorney just sent over medical documentation. She was at an emergency clinic yesterday afternoon. The pregnancy test was negative, Emma. She lied. Again. Relief flooded through me so intensely I felt dizzy. She's not pregnant. She's not pregnant, Patricia confirmed. And her attorney knows it, which means she tried to lie to her own lawyer. I've forwarded the documentation to the prosecutor. They're adding a charge of attempting to obstruct justice through false statements. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt exhausted. Why would she lie about something so easily disproven? Because she's desperate and not thinking clearly. Or because she's so accustomed to lying that it's become her default response to every situation. Patricia paused. Emma, this confirms everything. Sarah is exactly who we thought she was. Every doubt you had last night can be put to rest. But when I went downstairs to tell Daniel, prepared for relief or vindication, I found him at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, and the words died in my throat. She's not pregnant, I said quietly. It was another lie. Patricia verified it. He didn't look up, didn't react at all for several long moments. Then, I know you were trying to protect me. I know everything you did came from love. But Emma, I needed to discover this myself, to realize on my own that she was wrong for me. Instead, you investigated her like a criminal case and blew up my life in spectacular fashion. And now I'm sitting here the day I was supposed to get married, alone and humiliated, and everyone knows my fiancé was a con artist. He finally looked up, his eyes red but dry of tears. You were right about her, but you took away my chance to figure that out, to end things on my terms. You took away my agency in my own life. His words hit harder than any accusation Sarah had thrown at me. I'd been so focused on being right, on protecting him, on delivering justice, that I hadn't considered what it would cost him emotionally to have his life dissected and destroyed by his own sister. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. I should have given you more time. You should have trusted me, he corrected. Trusted that eventually I would have seen through her. Maybe it would have taken months. Maybe she would have gotten some money. But I would have learned an important lesson and moved on. Instead, you learned the lesson for me, and I'll never know if I could have figured it out myself. He stood and walked past me, leaving the kitchen, leaving me standing there with my righteousness feeling hollow. Patricia arrived at 8 for the police interview, and we drove downtown in silence heavy with unspoken tension. The fraud division office was in a nondescript building that smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. Detective Ramirez was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of Patricia. Miss Morrison, Mr. Morrison, thank you for coming in. She gestured to chairs in a small interview room. I understand this has been a difficult time for you both. I want to assure you that we take fraud cases very seriously, particularly those involving vulnerable victims. I'm not vulnerable, Daniel said quietly. I was just stupid. You were targeted by someone skilled at manipulation, Detective Ramirez corrected. That's different. She opened a file. I've reviewed the evidence your aunt submitted. The audio confession, medical records, financial documentation. It's quite comprehensive. Emma, I understand you conducted much of this investigation yourself? Yes, ma'am. I'm a forensic accountant by profession. When I had reason to suspect fraud, I used the same investigative techniques I would for a professional case. And the recording? Miss Bennett was clearly intoxicated when she made those statements. She was. But she initiated the conversation, volunteered the information without coercion, and said it in a semi-public space where others could have overheard. I don't believe intoxication negates the voluntary nature of her confession. Detective Ramirez nodded. Legally, you're correct. We've also verified that Miss Bennett attempted to file a false pregnancy claim yesterday with her attorney, which corroborates the pattern of deception. She looked at Daniel sympathetically. Mr. Morrison, I need to ask some difficult questions about your relationship with Miss Bennett. Did she ever mention financial difficulties? Daniel shook his head. She said she was between brand deals sometimes, but she always seemed to have money for nice clothes, restaurants. I offered to help with expenses a few times, and she'd get offended, say she was independent. He laughed bitterly. I thought it was admirable. Turns out she was just hiding debt. The interview continued for 2 hours. Detective Ramirez methodically building a case that Sarah had deliberately targeted Daniel, researched his family's wealth, and constructed an elaborate fraud to access his trust fund. By the time we finished, I felt wrung out and strangely empty. We'll be arresting Miss Bennett this afternoon, Detective Ramirez said as we prepared to leave. Given the evidence, she'll likely be offered a plea deal. Probation, restitution, maybe some jail time. First offense, nonviolent, judges tend to be lenient. She handed Daniel her card. If she attempts to contact you, don't respond. Let us know immediately. Outside the building, Daniel turned to me. You got what you wanted. Sarah's going to be arrested, prosecuted, her life destroyed. Are you satisfied? No, I admitted honestly. I thought I would be, but I'm not. Why not? I considered the question, watching morning traffic move through downtown Portland. Normal people going about normal lives, unaware that somewhere nearby, a woman was about to be arrested for trying to steal $500,000 through a fake pregnancy. Because this was supposed to feel like justice, but it just feels sad. She's a terrible person who deserves consequences, but destroying her didn't fix anything for you. Daniel nodded slowly. No, it didn't. He started walking toward Patricia's car, then stopped. But thank you for trying. I know you were doing what you thought was right. I'm just not ready to be grateful yet. Fair enough, I thought. I'd saved him from financial ruin and a fraudulent marriage, but I'd robbed him of his agency, his dignity, and his ability to learn his own lessons. That was a price I'd paid without his consent. Sarah was arrested at 3:47 p.m. that afternoon while trying to board a flight to Los Angeles at Portland International Airport. The arrest made the evening news. Dramatic footage of her in handcuffs being led through the terminal, while travelers watched and filmed on their phones. By nightfall, the video had gone viral, Sarah's face frozen in a mask of rage and humiliation as airport police read her rights. I watched the footage on my laptop in my apartment, having finally returned home after spending 2 days at my parents' house. The comments section beneath the news article was brutal. People who'd never met Sarah felt entitled to judge every aspect of her character, appearance, and choices. Some criticized her manipulation, others made jokes about fake pregnancies, a few even expressed sympathy before being shouted down by the majority. This was what I'd wanted. Complete social destruction. Sarah's name permanently associated with fraud and deception. But watching it unfold felt different than planning it. The woman being arrested on camera looked smaller, more desperate, nothing like the polished performer who'd charmed her way into my family. She looked defeated. Good, I told myself firmly. She tried to destroy my brother. This is justice. But Daniel's words echoed. You took away my agency in my own life. My phone rang. Tyler's name appeared. Have you seen the airport video? He asked without preamble. Yes. Emma, I need to tell you something, and you're probably not going to like it. He took a breath. I ran into one of Sarah's friends today, Rachel, from the boutique where Sarah worked. She was crying at a coffee shop, talking about how everyone's treating Sarah like a monster. I sat down, and she told me some things about Sarah's background that put everything in a different light. My jaw tightened. Rachel probably doesn't know the full story. Rachel knows Sarah had an abortion when she was 21 because her boyfriend at the time forced her to choose between him and the baby. She knows Sarah had the endometrial ablation because that same boyfriend had raped her, gotten her pregnant, and the trauma made her terrified of ever being pregnant again. She chose permanent infertility because it was the only way she felt safe. I went very still. The medical records hadn't mentioned that history, just the procedure itself. That doesn't excuse fraud. I'm not saying it does, Tyler cut me off. I'm saying Sarah isn't a cartoon villain. She's a damaged person who made terrible choices out of desperation and trauma. The debt? From medical bills after the rape, therapy she couldn't afford, trying to start over multiple times, the Instagram following, a pathetic attempt to feel successful when her life was falling apart. He paused. She's still guilty of fraud, Emma. But maybe she's not the calculating predator you've made her out to be. Maybe she's just broken. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment as evening darkened tonight, Tyler's words disrupting the clean narrative I'd built. I'd seen Sarah as the villain in Daniel's story, and myself as the protective sister delivering righteous justice. But what if it was more complicated? What if Sarah was both victim and victimizer, someone whose trauma had twisted her into doing unconscionable things? It didn't change the facts. She'd still committed fraud. She'd still lied to Daniel about wanting children when she'd made herself incapable of having them. She'd still planned to fake a miscarriage and steal his inheritance. Tragic backstory didn't erase those actions, but it complicated them, and complication made my absolute certainty feel naive. I spent the next few days in a strange limbo, going to work, doing my job, coming home to an empty apartment and too many thoughts. Sarah was released on bail. $10,000 that I later learned Rachel had somehow scrounged together through crowdfunding and personal loans. The crowdfunding page described Sarah as a victim of a vindictive family who destroyed her life over a misunderstanding, raised $12,000 in 48 hours, and made me look like the villain in her story. The prosecution offered Sarah a plea deal exactly as Detective Ramirez had predicted. 2 years probation, 300 hours community service, mandatory counseling, and restitution of all money my family had spent on wedding preparations. Roughly $47,000. Sarah's public defender advised her to take it. She refused. She wants to go to trial, Patricia informed me over the phone on Wednesday evening. Her attorney thinks it's insane, but Sarah is insisting. She claims she can prove the family conspired against her, that you manufactured evidence, that she's the real victim here. That's delusional, I said. We have her recorded confession, which her attorney will argue was obtained through deception while she was intoxicated and therefore inadmissible. They'll claim the medical records were accessed illegally. They'll paint you as an obsessed sister with a vendetta who destroyed evidence that might have exonerated Sarah. Patricia sighed. Emma, they're going to put you on trial as much as Sarah. Your investigative methods, your motivations, your social media campaign. Be prepared for your character to be absolutely shredded. Part of me wanted to back down, accept that Sarah taking a plea deal was enough. But a larger part, the part that remembered Daniel's devastated face when he learned the truth, refused to let her rewrite history. Let them try. The evidence speaks for itself. The trial was scheduled for 6 weeks out, giving both sides time to prepare. In the interim, Sarah's defense attorney began a calculated PR campaign. They leaked selected text messages between Sarah and Daniel that showed genuine affection. They found old friends willing to testify that Sarah had truly wanted children before her trauma. They painted a picture of a desperate woman who'd made a terrible mistake, but didn't deserve the destruction I'd rained down on her. Public opinion, which had been firmly against Sarah, began to shift. Local news ran a segment about vigilante justice in the digital age, using my social media posts about Sarah as examples of how internet campaigns could destroy lives without due process. The comment section split between those who believed Sarah was a con artist getting what she deserved, and those who thought I'd gone too far, turning a family dispute into a criminal matter out of spite. Daniel stopped taking my calls. When I went to his apartment, he opened the door only wide enough to say, "I don't want to see you right now, Emma. What you did was supposed to protect me, but it just made everything worse. Sarah's life is destroyed, my life is destroyed, and you get to be the hero who saved everyone. Except nobody feels saved." The door closed in my face before I could respond. My parents were caught in an impossible position, supporting me because they knew Sarah had committed fraud, but sympathizing with Daniel's anger, and increasingly uncomfortable with how far I'd taken my investigation. Sunday dinners became tense affairs where we discussed anything except the trial, the canceled wedding, or Sarah's name trending on social media. Work became my refuge until my boss called me into her office 3 weeks before the trial. Margaret Chen was a woman in her 60s who'd built our forensic accounting firm from nothing, respected and feared in equal measure. "Emma, I've received a letter from Sarah Bennett's attorney," she said, sliding a document across her desk. "They're alleging that you used company resources and databases to conduct a personal investigation, potentially violating our licensing agreements and ethical obligations." My stomach dropped. "I used the same databases we access for professional fraud investigations." "For a personal matter involving your family," Margaret interrupted. "Emma, I understand why you did it. I probably would have done the same. But this firm operates on trust and ethical standards. If it comes out in trial that you accessed restricted databases for personal reasons, it could jeopardize our licensing, our client relationships, everything we've built." She removed her glasses, suddenly looking older. "I'm suspending you without pay pending the trial's outcome. If the judge rules your investigation was conducted properly, you can return. If not, I'll have to terminate your employment." I walked out of her office in a daze. Everything I'd done to protect Daniel, the investigation, the evidence gathering, the social campaign, was now threatening to destroy my career, my relationship with my brother, and my family's peace. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally allowed myself to question whether I'd been right. Not right about Sarah committing fraud. That was indisputable. But right about how I'd handled it, about the scorched earth response that had felt justified in the moment but now seemed excessive. I'd told myself I was protecting family, but had I been protecting Daniel, or had I been proving something to myself? Proving I was smart enough to catch a con artist, capable enough to conduct a professional investigation, powerful enough to destroy someone who'd hurt people I loved? The line between justice and revenge had seemed clear when I started. Now it felt blurred, shifting, impossible to define. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You ruined my life over money your brother doesn't even need. I hope you can live with that. Sarah." I stared at the message for a long time, then blocked the number without responding. But her words lingered. Daniel didn't need the trust fund money. He made good money at his job, had savings, could have built a comfortable life without the inheritance. The trust fund had been the catalyst, but the real issue was Sarah's deception about wanting children, about who she truly was. Except, what if Tyler was right? What if Sarah's trauma had made her genuinely terrified of pregnancy, and she'd convinced herself that faking it temporarily was the only way to secure a future with someone she did care about? What if the plan to fake a miscarriage was a panicked backup, not the primary goal? What if she'd hoped to figure out a way to make Daniel happy despite her infertility, maybe adoption, maybe surrogacy, but needed the financial security first? I was inventing sympathetic narratives for someone who'd confessed to deliberate fraud. This was what gaslighting felt like from the inside. doubting my own clear-eyed assessment of evidence because the social cost of being right was higher than I'd anticipated. No, I pulled myself back to facts. Sarah had purchased a fake pregnancy test. She had planned to fake a miscarriage. She had admitted using Daniel for money. She had threatened Patricia with false accusations. These were not the actions of a sympathetic victim making understandable mistakes. These were calculated deceptions. But they were calculated deceptions by someone who'd been raped, who'd been forced to choose between a baby and a relationship, who'd undergone medical trauma that changed her body permanently. Did that context excuse her actions? No. Did it explain them? Yes. An explanation complicated the clean narrative of villain and hero I'd constructed. The trial began on a gray November morning, Portland rain hammering against the courthouse windows. I sat behind the prosecutor's table with Patricia and my parents. Daniel sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, deliberately not looking at us. Sarah entered in a modest gray dress that made her look vulnerable and small, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup, every inch the misunderstood victim her attorney wanted the jury to see. Jury selection took 2 days. The prosecution wanted people who'd been victims of fraud. The defense wanted people sympathetic to women in difficult situations. They settled on 12 people who looked uncomfortable with the attention and probably wished they were anywhere else. Opening statements painted 2 completely different pictures. The prosecutor described a calculating predator who'd researched Daniel's family, identified a vulnerability, and constructed an elaborate fraud to steal $500,000. Sarah's attorney described a traumatized woman who'd made a desperate mistake while trying to build a life with a man she genuinely cared for, only to be destroyed by his vindictive sister who couldn't accept anyone being part of their family. I was the prosecution's star witness, called on day 3. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Linda Alvarez, walked me through my investigation methodically. Why I'd become suspicious. How I'd gathered evidence. The moment I'd recorded Sarah's confession. The medical records proving she couldn't be pregnant. The fake pregnancy test purchase. Every answer was backed by documentation projected onto screens for the jury. Sarah's voice filled the courtroom. There's no baby. I bought a fake test online. The jury's faces showed disgust, sympathy, confusion, a mix that made it impossible to predict which way they'd lean. Then came cross-examination, and Sarah's attorney, Marcus Reeves, went for blood. Miss Morrison, you testified that you're a forensic accountant. That's a position of trust, isn't it? You have access to confidential financial databases? Yes, for professional investigations. And you use those databases to investigate Sarah Bennett, correct? I used publicly available information and databases I have legitimate access to. For personal reasons, Reeves cut me off. Not for a client, not for your employer, but because you didn't like your brother's girlfriend. Because I suspected fraud, I corrected. Suspected, not proved. Suspected. Reeves paced before the jury. So based on suspicion, you accessed confidential databases, obtained medical records, through proper channels. Through channels meant for professional fraud investigations, not personal family disputes. Miss Morrison, did you obtain a court order before accessing Sarah Bennett's medical records? My hesitation was fatal. The records were obtained through a contact who verified. Did you obtain a court order? Yes or no? No. Reeves turned to the jury triumphantly. So you illegally accessed private medical information about a woman you admittedly disliked because you suspected, not proved, suspected, that she might be lying to your brother. And based on these illegally obtained records, you launched a social media campaign that destroyed her reputation before she was ever charged with a crime. Does that sound like justice to you, Miss Morrison? I was protecting my brother from fraud. From a relationship you didn't approve of, Reeves corrected. Miss Morrison, isn't it true that you tried to discourage your brother from dating Sarah before any pregnancy was announced? That you told him to take things slower? Yes, but... And isn't it true that you were suspended from your job for misusing company resources during this investigation? The courtroom went very quiet. Yes, I admitted. So your own employer found your conduct unethical, but you expect this jury to believe you were acting righteously? Reeves shook his head. No further questions. I left the stand feeling like I'd been flayed alive. The prosecutor tried to rehabilitate my testimony on redirect, emphasizing that Sarah's own confession proved the fraud regardless of how it was obtained. But the damage was done. I'd been reframed from protective sister to obsessive vigilante who destroyed a woman's life over personal dislike disguised as concern. Sarah took the stand on day 5, and she was devastating. She described meeting Daniel, falling for his kindness, feeling hope for the first time since her rape. She admitted buying the fake pregnancy test, but claimed it was a moment of panic when Daniel started talking about marriage requiring children. I loved him so much, and I was terrified he'd leave me if he knew I couldn't have babies. It was stupid, wrong, but it wasn't about money. It was about keeping the man I loved. She cried, describing her plan to eventually tell him the truth, to suggest adoption or surrogacy once they were married, and she felt secure in his love. I never meant to hurt him. I just wanted a chance at happiness after years of trauma and struggle. The fake miscarriage plan? I was going to tell him the pregnancy wasn't viable because of complications from my medical history, which was true. Even if I had been pregnant, my uterus couldn't support it. Then I'd explain my infertility, and we'd talk about alternatives. I wasn't trying to steal money. I was trying to keep my relationship. It was a masterful performance, hitting every note of feminine vulnerability and trauma without quite admitting criminal intent. The jury looked sympathetic. Several women were crying. Then Prosecutor Alvarez stood for cross-examination, and everything changed. Miss Bennett, you testified that you loved Daniel Morrison and wanted to build a life with him, correct? Yes. And you claim your purchase of a fake pregnancy test was a panicked mistake, not a calculated fraud? Yes. It was a terrible mistake. How do you explain researching the Morrison Family Trust Fund 6 months before you announced your fake pregnancy? Alvarez pulled up browser history records from Sarah's laptop, seized during the arrest. Here's a search for Morrison Family Portland net worth. Here's one for Thomas Morrison Trust Fund conditions. Here's one for can fake pregnancy tests be detected? All dated months before you told Daniel you were pregnant. Sarah's face went pale. I was curious about his family. And here's an email you sent to yourself, Alvarez continued relentlessly, titled, Plan A, dated 4 months before the fake pregnancy announcement. Let me read it to the jury. Get pregnant, real or fake. Marriage, hard trust access. After money secured, either real baby or fake miscarriage depending on situation. No prenup possible if pregnant. Community property state, Taj 50% minimum. Backup, if caught. Play victim card. Blame family pressure. The courtroom erupted. Sarah's attorney objected frantically. The judge called for order. But the damage was catastrophic. Sarah's own words, her own planning document, proving premeditated fraud with calculated backup plans. This wasn't a mistake, was it, Miss Bennett? Alvarez pressed. This was a con that you researched, planned, and executed. Your testimony today about love and trauma is just another performance. Plan B from your own email. Play the victim card when caught. Sarah crumbled on the stand, her careful composure shattering. I needed the money, she finally admitted, all pretense gone. I was drowning in debt, facing homelessness, and Daniel had everything. His family had everything. It wasn't fair that they could throw away $500,000 on a trust fund while I couldn't pay rent. So yes, I planned it. Yes, I researched it. And yes, I would have taken the money and probably left eventually. But I wasn't wrong to be angry about the inequality, about people like the Morrisons having so much while people like me have nothing. It was the most honest thing she'd said during the entire trial, and it convicted her completely. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Attempted fraud, criminal threatening against Patricia, and making false statements to law enforcement. Sarah collapsed when the verdict was read, her attorney catching her before she hit the floor. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. I sat through the victim impact statements. Daniel describing the emotional devastation of learning his relationship was a con, Patricia explaining the ethical bind Sarah had put her in, my mother tearfully recounting the joy of expecting a grandchild, followed by the crushing revelation that it was all lies. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened impassively before pronouncing sentence. Miss Bennett, you have shown a pattern of calculated deception targeting vulnerable individuals for financial gain. While I acknowledge the trauma in your background, it does not excuse or even adequately explain your actions. The premeditation evident in your planning documents demonstrates not a moment of panic, but a sustained criminal enterprise. I sentence you to 18 months in a minimum security facility, followed by 3 years probation, mandatory counseling, and full restitution of expenses incurred by the Morrison family. Sarah was led away in handcuffs, her face blank with shock. 18 months. Not the probation her attorney had hoped for, but far less than the 5 years she could have received. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Patricia handled them efficiently, stating that justice had been served and the family wished to move forward privately. I stood beside my parents, saying nothing, feeling oddly hollow despite the victory. Daniel approached as we were leaving. He looked thinner than he had 6 weeks ago, older, worn down by the trial and its revelations. "You were right," he said quietly. "About everything. The planning document proved she never loved me, never wanted a real relationship. It was always about money." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "I know." He managed a thin smile. "But, Emma, being right doesn't mean you handled it right. You were right about Sarah, but you still took away my choice, still investigated her like a criminal when I should have been allowed to discover the truth myself. You saved me from financial fraud, but cost me something else, the ability to trust my own judgment." "How do I fix that?" I asked. "You don't," he replied. "I fix it by learning to trust myself again, and you accept that sometimes protecting people isn't the same as controlling their lives." He walked away, leaving me standing in the November rain, victorious and vindicated and completely unsatisfied. 3 months after Sarah's sentencing, I sat in Margaret Chen's office receiving the news that my suspension was being lifted. The judge's ruling that my investigation methods, while ethically questionable, were ultimately legal, had cleared the way for my reinstatement. "You're a brilliant forensic accountant, Emma," Margaret said, her expression neutral. "But this situation has taught you, and this firm, valuable lessons about maintaining professional boundaries. You used professional tools for personal purposes. That it uncovered legitimate fraud doesn't erase the ethical breach." "I understand," I said quietly. "Do you?" Margaret leaned forward. "Because I'm not sure you do. You saw a problem and you solved it with every resource at your disposal. That's what makes you good at fraud investigation. But Emma, not every problem in life can be solved by gathering evidence and building an airtight case. Some situations require letting people make their own mistakes and learn their own lessons." I returned to work the following week, welcomed back by colleagues who were supportive but noticeably more distant. The trial had been public enough that everyone knew the story. The protective sister who'd destroyed her brother's con artist fiancé. Objectively, I was the hero. Subjectively, people seemed uncomfortable with how thoroughly I'd dismantled another human being's life. Daniel and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully, with new boundaries neither of us had needed before. We met for coffee once a week, talking about work and weather and neutral topics, avoiding anything too personal. The easy closeness we'd shared before was gone, replaced by something more cautious, but perhaps more honest. "I started seeing a therapist," he told me 3 months after the trial, "to work through trust issues and learn to recognize manipulative behavior. She asked me if I blamed you for exposing Sarah." "Do you?" I asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not for exposing her, but for how you did it. The social media campaign, the way you turned her into a public villain before she was even charged. That felt less like protection and more like revenge." He wasn't wrong. I'd told myself I was preventing future victims, but really I'd wanted Sarah to suffer publicly, completely, permanently. Justice would have been reporting her to police and letting the legal system handle it. What I'd done was destroy her so thoroughly that she'd never recover, even after serving her sentence. "I'm sorry," I said, not for the first time. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "I know," Daniel replied. "But Emma, the right thing and the righteous thing aren't always the same." Sarah was released after 11 months for good behavior, emerging from minimum security to a world that still remembered her name as synonymous with fraud. The social media posts I'd created were permanent, indexed by search engines, appearing whenever anyone Googled her name. She'd served her criminal sentence, but the social punishment would follow her indefinitely. I learned through Patricia that Sarah had moved to a different state, changed her name legally, and was working at a warehouse under her new identity. She'd paid off $3,000 of her restitution debt in the first 6 months after release, sending money orders to Patricia's office with no return address. The remaining $44,000 would probably take her years to repay, if she ever managed it at all. Sometimes I wondered if I'd gone too far. If exposing her fraud to police would have been enough without the social media destruction. If letting the legal system handle it without my public campaign would have achieved justice without the permanent scarlet letter I'd given her. But then I'd remember Sarah's own words. I would have taken the money and probably left eventually. I'd remember the planning document showing calculated fraud. I'd remember my brother's devastated face when he learned the woman he loved had never existed. No, Sarah had earned her consequences. Every single one. My relationship with my parents stabilized as the drama faded into uncomfortable family history. Sunday dinners resumed, carefully avoiding any mention of the trial, Sarah, or that entire chaotic autumn. We talked about my niece's soccer games, dad's retirement plans, mom's garden. Normal family things, with an undercurrent of awareness that we'd survived something that could have fractured us permanently. I dated occasionally, but found myself holding back, analyzing potential partners with forensic precision, looking for red flags and inconsistencies. Tyler joked that I'd become too good at spotting deception to ever trust anyone again. He wasn't entirely wrong. 1 year after the trial, I received a letter forwarded through Patricia's office. Sarah's handwriting, unmistakable despite the passage of time. Emma, I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know what I did was wrong and I accept the consequences. But I need you to understand something. You didn't save your brother from me. You saved him from a version of me that existed in your head, a calculated monster who never felt anything real. The truth is more complicated. Yes, I planned the fraud. Yes, I used Daniel for financial security. But I also genuinely cared for him, enjoyed our time together, and convinced myself I could make him happy despite the lies. I'm not asking you to believe that, because it doesn't matter anymore. What I want you to know is that the destroyed life you're satisfied with isn't just mine. Your brother lost his ability to trust. Your family lost peace. You lost your certainty that protecting people is always good. Was it worth it? I already know your answer. This letter is asking you to consider if that answer is honest. Sarah! I read the letter 3 times, feeling the familiar defensiveness rise. She was manipulating me again, trying to rewrite history, make me doubt myself. But beneath the defensiveness was a quieter voice asking if she had a point. I'd destroyed Sarah completely. She deserved legal consequences for fraud, but had she deserved social annihilation? Permanent unemployability? A life lived under a fake name because her real one was poisoned forever? The line between justice and revenge remained blurred no matter how long I stared at it. I never responded to Sarah's letter. What could I say? That I was sorry? I wasn't. Not really. That she deserved it? That felt cruel. That I'd do it again? Probably, but with less certainty than before. Instead, I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box with other remnants of that autumn. The thumb drive with evidence, the trial transcripts, photos from the wedding that never happened. Artifacts of a time when I'd been absolutely certain I was right, before certainty became complicated by consequence. Daniel got engaged again 2 years after the trial to a woman named Jessica, who worked as a pediatric nurse. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully, with none of the whirlwind intensity that had marked his time with Sarah. When he introduced her to the family, I watched for warning signs with forensic precision. Found none, forced myself to relax and trust his judgment. At their wedding, a small ceremony in my parents' backyard, Daniel pulled me aside during the reception. "Thank you for not investigating Jessica," he said, half joking but with an edge of seriousness. "I thought about it," I admitted, "but I promised myself I'd trust your judgment this time." "And do you? Trust my judgment?" I looked at Jessica across the yard, laughing with my mother, her hand resting on the small bump that indicated their baby was due in 5 months. Yes, I said honestly. I do. Good, Daniel replied. Because Emma, you were right about Sarah, but you were wrong about what I needed. I didn't need protection. I needed to learn from my own mistakes. This time, with Jessica, I'm choosing with my eyes open. That matters more than being saved from danger ever could. I watched him return to his new wife, his new life, his new chance at happiness built on his own choices, rather than my intervention. And for the first time since that October rehearsal dinner when everything exploded, I felt something approaching peace. Sarah served her sentence. Daniel rebuilt his life. I learned that being right doesn't always mean being righteous, and that justice and revenge live closer together than I'd ever been comfortable admitting. The consequences I delivered were earned and proportional to Sarah's fraud. I didn't regret exposing her or ensuring she faced criminal charges. But I did regret the social media campaign, the permanent destruction that followed her beyond her legal sentence. That had been revenge disguised as prevention, satisfaction disguised as duty. I couldn't undo it. Sarah would carry that scarlet letter forever, her real name forever associated with fraud and deception in search engines and social media databases. Whether that was justice or cruelty remained an open question I'd probably spend the rest of my life trying to answer. But Daniel was happy. Patricia had been vindicated. My parents had avoided losing money to a con artist. The trust fund remained intact for when it was genuinely needed. And I'd learned boundaries I hadn't known I needed. About the difference between protection and control, between justice and revenge, between being right and being good. Some lessons can only be learned through the wreckage they create.